In this episode of Careers That Matter, I'm joined by Gavin Dew. Gavin, you've had a lot of careers in your life. How do you characterize what your role is at the moment?
I usually don't, Stu. My wife likes to joke that she doesn't know what I do for a living, and I say she's probably not wrong. But a lot of my work has generally been around how to get complicated major projects built in difficult, political and public opinion environments. So whether that's I've done oil and gas projects, I've done gaming projects, I've done housing. I recently tried to do agricultural technology. I have been a project fixer trying to get things built in an environment where it's very hard to do so. Basically, my job shouldn't exist, but unfortunately it does, because we have a seeming inability of government and private sector to talk to one another in a reasonable way and get things built.
I quite like it on your LinkedIn profile. You go, if it's tough, challenging, and hard, bring it on. And maybe it's not quite the way that you put it. But why? What is it about that attracts you?
It's worth doing. It's worth doing, Stu, right? I mean, I've always believed that, anything worth doing is hard. And, somehow along the way, years and years ago, I sort of found myself slipping on a banana peel and landing in a position of working on some tricky projects. And I think that you could kind of have one of two responses to doing that kind of work. One is you say, I don't like that and I don't ever want to do it again. And the other is you go, that was really interesting and fun. And you start digging into how does this actually work? And what are the component parts of what makes this project possible? Because if you believe this project needs doing, then you also know it needs doing, but that can't be done ignoring the community within which it's built. I wrote my MBA thesis on social license to operate and how major projects and policy get community consent. So that's actually, I'm flippant about it, but that's a really important part of what you do. So you go in, you're trying to build something, and you've got a community group or a stakeholder group for whom there's an issue, and that is going to be a problem. Well, you can either choose to have a fight, or you can go in and you can try to solve that issue. So I was recently working on a project where there were a significant volume of unsanctioned mountain bike trails in the area of the development. And everybody kind of thought, well, that's going to be a fight. There's going to be a fight between the development and the trail users. And there could have been. And, the landowner could have put up fences and said, stay off my land. Instead, we built a fantastic relationship with the trail users, turned them into supporters of our project, worked with them to shape a way to preserve the trails, worked with them to help turn the trails into more of a tourism asset, worked with them to make sure that we had a really clear understanding of, hey, if a trail has to be displaced because of the development, here's how we're going to work together to make sure we do it in a way that's going to work for all of us. And that's a choice. You just have to be willing to take those issues and turn them into opportunities to shape the project and make it better.
So what does a typical day look like for you then?
Every day is different. And sometimes you wake up to a crisis. Sometimes you wake up not knowing exactly what's going to happen next. Sometimes you might be grinding away on trying to figure out how do we document something, how do we do something. Some days you're just kind of looking for that inspiration that hits, and you realize there's a way to square a circle. You realize, I'll give you an example just because I've got that trails issue on my mind. First meeting I ever had with that particular stakeholder group was very tense. Nobody really knew what to think of each other. And in the meeting, somewhere in there, we went, well, why don't we pull up some maps? And we pulled up maps and realized we really didn't have an issue. And it was quite a jarring moment. But it's sometimes it's just kind of having the creativity and the willingness to improvise to figure out, actually, maybe we really just need to establish a common fact base here. Maybe we really need to establish what we agree on and what we disagree on here, because then we can actually find a way to get to yes. So a lot of it really is just, it's creativity, it's problem solving, I learn a lot from being a parent. But it's the requirement, I think, of being able to bring together an understanding of how the business aspect of what a given project looks like, is like. So, what are the numbers and cents? What makes a commercial impact on a project and what doesn't? And at the same time, what's the human impact? Because sometimes there are things that can't change because they're commercially inflexible. And sometimes there are things which seem as if they're massive issues, but they're actually really solvable. So it's kind of having the instincts to try to negotiate and navigate that and find ways to bring together groups of people that often believe they disagree more than they actually disagree.
So I can't help but think, to get to a point where you can navigate your way through the complexity of this, you got to bring a body of experience with you, that because you can't make this stuff up. You either know how it works, and then therefore you can find creative solutions, or you flail away at it. What's the kind of experience that you bring to this work? How did you gain that sort of insight?
You know, I think it probably all started when I was a university student. I was in student government at the University of British Columbia, and I had the opportunity to be what was called the Vice President Academic and University Affairs. Hopefully the longest title I'll ever have. But my job was basically to represent students and work with the university on anything that affected students, from development on campus to academic integrity, all kinds of issues. And I realized through that process that I was one person, one student, and I was navigating this labyrinthine institution where people didn't talk to each other. And a lot of the time it would be me meeting with one tentacle of the university and then another, and then telling them, hey, you guys should talk. And just realizing how those things fit together. So I had a really amazing opportunity at an early stage in my career to be a problem solver with real world consequences, and to see the way that decisions overlaid and fit together, and to feel myself to be a peer with decision makers and be able to influence them. So I think it all really started from there, and then worked through a whole succession of different jobs.
So let's go to that situation. You're a student at UBC. How did you find the gumption to say, well, hang on a second, are you sure that we can't do this? What about this? I'm going to go talk to this person. And that takes a tremendous amount of confidence. Where did you acquire that?
I'll tell you a fun story. When I was a student, there was an event called Arts County Fair at UBC. Anybody who grew up in Vancouver in my era knew that it was a big, giant charity rock show, about 15,000 people a year. And it was, the last day of school, huge event. I was an art student, and I had grown up playing in heavy metal bands, was very into live music, all that stuff.
Heavy metal bands?
Yeah, I grew up playing the drums in an industrial thrash metal band and other bands as well. So there I am. I'm in second year university, and we have this event called Arts County Fair, which I get involved with. Basically, we're producing a giant rock concert. It was Arts County Fair, not Business County Fair. And the business aspects were a little loose. So it lost $80,000 one year on a, call it a $400,000 budget. And everyone kind of thought, well, this thing's probably over. It's gonna end. And absolutely nobody was willing to take on the financial role to figure out whether this thing actually could be saved. And I liked live music. I didn't know the first thing about business. I've never used Microsoft Excel in my life. There were no historical financials for the last 3-4 years of the event that I can recall. And I just sort of thought, well, we can't let this die because it's cool. This is a really amazing thing that makes an impact on 15,000 people's life every year. It raises money for good causes. We just got to turn this thing around. And myself and a few other people made the decision that we weren't going to let it die. So I quit my job delivering pizza and spent basically 4 or 6 months dissecting this business and learning sort of by accident that we hadn't increased the price of beer in 10 years, but our costs had gone up. We hadn't increased the price of tickets in years, but our costs had gone up. We hadn't negotiated at all with suppliers, and their prices had gone up. So I kind of got an accidental education in business, turned around a 15,000 person charity rock concert, went from I think losing 80 grand to making 72 the next year. And that for me was just this moment of, oh, I can do this. It was a coming into the realization of, I don't have to accept that this thing is going to fail. I'm willing to be the one person that sticks their hand up and says, we can make that better. And you know what? I could have screwed up and it could have not gone well, but at least I would have learned a heck of a lot in the process. Fortunately, it worked. And it also was sort of my introduction to business. I learned to be an entrepreneur because I had the fortune of being handed $500,000 15,000 people and the real world consequences of success or failure when I was probably 21.
And you were hooked.
And I was hooked. I fell in love with it. And there was something about it that I had grown up playing music. Again, I was a drummer. I did sequencers, synthesizers. I fell in love with the music of business. And the idea of like you look at a business model in Excel and you just like start seeing the numbers dance. It's like composing music. It's like thinking about structure and you start going, God, that's the music. That's how it works. That's the thing that we have to fix. And then this business works. And I was absolutely hooked. And from then I just kind of saw entrepreneurship and the creation of business as being almost comparable to painting or photography or music, in that it's fun, it's exciting, and if you fall in love with it and you make it something that you're passionate about, then you just want to keep on doing it over and over again.
Well, clearly you're still moving down that path, but somewhere along the line you said, you know, I think I'm going to take a run at politics.
Yeah.
And you didn't get what you wanted.
Didn't I? No. You know, I it was the same thing, Stu. I stepped into politics once or twice. I ran to lead the BC Liberal Party because I saw a moment in our province where I knew that there was a generation of young people, especially young people who were entrepreneurial, business-oriented, who wanted to be successful and who increasingly felt unrepresented. And I think that there was, frankly, a party that was taking them for granted and was assuming that they would just magically become supporters, and was not extending that hand out and pulling them into the coalition, was not bringing new industries into the coalition. So I ran in that leadership race. I didn't expect to spend 18 months doing it, to be honest. Yeah. My initial thought was I'd get into the first debate, I'd make the point that we need a generational renewal, and then Bob's your uncle, and I'd be off to do something else. But it ended up being just an incredible experience and an education in politics, and also an education in politics is all about timing. And I would say I stand by virtually everything that I predicted at that time. I stand by everything I stood for in terms of what I felt the future of the party and the province needed to be. But I think it was too soon.
Well, and thus your perfect answer. Are you sure I didn't get what I wanted?
You know, I'm being flippant, but for me, it was an incredible education, and it was an opportunity to inject what I thought was a really needed element into the conversation. Because if I hadn't been there, then maybe we wouldn't have been talking about renewal in the same way. If I hadn't been there, maybe there wouldn't have been the necessity for other candidates to find their way to talk about renewal, to talk about bringing in the next generation, to talk about broadening the party. So I was happy with the impact that I was able to have, although obviously it's been unfortunate to watch how things have gone since then.
Well, you're moving on to other things because you're an entrepreneur. What, for a young person who might be watching this going, man, I love your enthusiasm and energy for what you do, what would you say is the most important personality trait that you possess that has played a role in your success?
Creativity and stubbornness. There's a fantastic book called The Obstacle is the Way that I came across lately. It's one of those books that you read and realize that you've been thinking it for years, and then somebody articulates it for you. And it just talks about the idea of taking obstacles and turning them into opportunities, or taking obstacles and using them to be your inspiration. So I've always found, particularly in my business life, that it's so important to recognize that when you hit a brick wall, you have a choice. You can either give up and curl up in a ball and say, I've failed, or you can go, okay, well, that path doesn't work. I've got to find another path. I think in entrepreneurship, it's important to strike the balance between persistence and realism, where sometimes you just need to fail fast. Sometimes, we are in entrepreneurship in Canada, we have a tendency to prolong companies for too long that have actually failed, and they become zombie startups, and they just don't finish failing. You have to learn how to fail and fail fast. Failure is not failure if you don't let it be. Sometimes it's about, this idea didn't work. That doesn't mean the company is a failure. It doesn't mean I am a failure. It doesn't mean that I can never do anything again. It means that I advanced the hypothesis, I tested the hypothesis didn't work. I can either continue flogging that dead horse until I'm exhausted, or I can figure out how to be faster every time at diagnosing the fact that that option is not going to work, so it's time to move to the next. And I would say, again, that stubbornness and creativity brought together, that's what I've become very good at, is taking a business model and just beating it up to the point of, does this work? And I've gotten, I would say, more and more rigorous at exploring a business model in concept before actually launching it as a company. Because there's a temptation, I think, for entrepreneurs to take the first idea and go, I've got to start a company with this. But sometimes what you really need to do is spend the time reflecting on, well, who's going to pay for this?
Right.
How is this going to work? How is this going to monetize? Is this a business or is it an idea? Because those are two different things. So figuring out how to be both stubborn and creative at the same time, both patient and impatient at the same time, I think really has been the key to my success.
Well, as I listen to you, I can't help but think that there has to be a willingness to take a chance.
Yes.
Because even saying, okay, I'm going to let this fail is a chance on its own, as well as I'm going to give this a try is another chance. You have to be willing to take those risks. You're not guided by the precautionary principle, which we talked about in our in our previous conversation. But and that's, I think that is the measure of somebody who goes, I believe in myself, I believe in what I'm doing, and I'm going to go out and make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, entrepreneurship is an act of hope.
Yes.
Entrepreneurship is an act of belief. It's an act of belief that you can do something, and it's an act of belief that you can change the world. It might only be a very small part of the world that you're going to change, but you have to fundamentally believe that the thing you are addressing is going to get better because you address it. And if you do that, then you're rolling a ball down a hill. And it starts gathering snow, it starts gathering momentum, because fundamentally, you can't start from the perspective of, I want to make money. You have to start from the perspective of, there is a problem that I am solving that people will pay to have solved because it is going to make their lives better. If you're not solving a problem, then what are you really doing being an entrepreneur?
Thank you for this insight into your thoughts, your jobs, your career.